Jihad has come to America.
Constitutes the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
Allahu Akbar! And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you too will make your destruction!
It's reported that the total number of terrorists is only a portion of the total number of Islamic extremists, which itself is but a tiny portion of the total number of Muslims. So how can one automatically attribute Islam to terrorism? Islam is a religion that has some 1.5 billion followers, most of which seem to be peaceful people. We ask tonight, is Islam a violent religion, as its critics have claimed, or is it a religion of compassion, as most Muslims would argue? Is it the radical Islamic movement in the Arab world, and more recently in Europe as well, which shapes our view on Islam? Doctrines of jihad and holy war are preached by so-called radical Muslims, but from where are they getting these doctrines? How are they interpreting them? Are radicals intimidating and silencing the moderates, or does the term radical even exist in Islam? When we consider the question of whether Islam has been hijacked and is dominated by radicals, many argue to look to the terms of absolute numbers and in terms of prominence. Well, how do we arrive at the truth about Islam? I'm sure tonight's panel can shed some light on these questions. We welcome you to Jihad Exposed, where tonight's question of the evening is, has Islam been hijacked by radicals? And it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our four panelists of the evening. Our first guest is Dr. Daniel Pipes, director of the Middle East Forum, a think tank that promotes American interests in the Middle East and protects the constitutional order from Middle Eastern threats. A former official in the U.S. Department of State, he has taught at the University of Chicago, Harvard University, the U.S. Naval War College, and Pepperdine University. Mr. Pipes is the author of 12 books on the Middle East, Islam, and other political topics. Pipes has also received 2 presidential appointments, has testified before many congressional committees, and has served on 5 presidential campaigns. Also with us, we have Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch, an organization dedicated to bringing public attention to the role that jihad theology and ideology plays in the modern world, and to correcting popular misconceptions about the role of jihad and religion in modern-day conflicts. Spencer is the author of 10 books, including the New York Times bestsellers The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. He's also led seminars on Islam and Jihad for the U.S. Central Command, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, the U.S. Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the U.S. Intelligence Committee. Our third guest of this evening, we have Imam Mustafa Zayed, a member of the Scientific Board of Quran and Sunnah Research of Cairo. He speaks widely in interfaith settings with a devotion to bridging peace between the major religions and communities. Zayed is author of several books, including The Lies About Muhammad, and is a leading teacher in the Islamic Society of Central Jersey. Imam Zayed was featured as one of 10 North American Islamic scholars on a British documentary entitled Islam in America. And last but not least, we have Abdullah Kundi with us, a Muslim apologist joining us live from Australia. He's participated in many debates with Christian scholars on subtopics relating to Islam and Christianity. He's undertaken studies in Islam with Sheikh Abdul Mawiz Navdi and Sheikh Wissam Shekhawi. He's completed studies in history and science at the University of Sydney and is currently studying medicine. Again, we welcome you this evening to Jihad Exposed, and tonight's topic, tonight's question is, how has Islam been hijacked, if it has been hijacked by radicals? And before we get into the details of tonight's topic, we should probably first define what we mean by the terms hijacked and radicals under the context of Islam. So, Robert, if you can sort of give us a brief overview, when someone claims that Islam has been hijacked, what are they talking about here? Because it almost gives the notion that more than one form of Islam exists.
Well, certainly more than one form of Islam does exist. There are various sects, the Sunnis and the Shia most famously, as well as the various schools of jurisprudence. And they do have various disagreements, although none of them are very large. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, famously is supposed to have said that the his community will not agree on an error, and there are no huge or major disagreements between the various groups, but there are differences. The problem when it comes to whether the religion has been hijacked or not, the claim is being made in saying that Islam fundamentally teaches peace and tolerance, harmony between peoples, and the idea of peaceful coexistence as equals with unbelievers. And the idea then comes from that the people who are committing violence in the name of Islam are somehow getting it wrong, twisting its teachings, misunderstanding them, and misapplying them. And then they would be termed the radicals, whereas those who are following the allegedly true and peaceful teachings would be termed the moderates. This is kind of a strange distinction, really, because a radical in general is someone who just does something very fanatically or tenaciously, but not someone who generally gets it all wrong. You know, people don't say that communist radicals are misunderstanding communism or misapplying its teachings. They're just very serious about carrying them out. And so when it comes to radical Muslims, one would think ordinarily, well, they're just the people who take it most seriously under carrying it out. But instead, we're told that, no, they're getting it all wrong, they're misunderstanding it. And so the question really can be solved simply by looking at the Quran and looking at the teachings of Muhammad as set out in the Hadith, and those things will show us whether Islam really teaches peace or warfare against unbelievers, and what kind of peace and what kind of warfare and so on. And these questions can be objectively verified simply by going to the canonical texts and teachings of Islam.
And right now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Pipes. You mentioned that there's 3 interpretations of Islam. If you can take us through those as well as what your view is on that.
I'm sorry, what are you referring to with the 3?
You've said that there are 3 interpretations or 3 views on Islam, the establishment view, the insurgent view, and the middle position view, which I believe is what you hold. If you could sort of help our audience understand a little more about that.
Right. My point is that in the United States, today more broadly in the West today, one finds 3 different understandings of what the nature of the problem is. What I call the establishment view is that there has been a hijacking of Islam, that the problem is extremism, right? The problem is Al-Qaeda, anything but mention Islam. The other reads on Islam, one says that the problem is Islam as such. The religion of Islam is in itself naturally aggressive, terrorist, and so forth. And there's nothing, and there always will be, that between those 2, which I focus not on Islam as such, but on a reading of Islam. You can call it radical Islam, Islamism, fundamentalist Islam, totalitarian Islam, political Islam, whatever one names it, it is a form of it. It's not the only understanding of it. And in this reading, it is in some profound sense Islam, but it's a version of it, indeed a modern version. There are historical precedents for Islamism, but Islamism is a modern phenomenon. It is transforming the religion of Islam into an ideology like socialism, communism, and that is something modern, something historical, something that I say has. I began studying Islamic topics in the late 1960s. Islamism was virtually moribund. It had no great importance today. It is the #1 strategic threat to the United States. So it has grown, and if it can grow it can, of course, also decline. And my goal is to have this form of Islam be crushed, just as fascism was crushed in World War II and communism was defeated in this Cold War. Now Islamism is the enemy and it must be defeated. It's akin to saying, I want to defeat a certain kind of German, a certain kind of Russian, not all Germans, not all Russians, but the fascist, the communist, and the Islamist.
Thank you for that introduction. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Imam Mustafa as we're, again, introducing the topic. For those of you just joining us, our question of the night is, has Islam been hijacked by radicals, Muslim radicals, that is? Imam Mustafa, if you could sort of take us through the interpretation process of Islam by a Muslim who carries out acts of terrorism under the name of Islam. If you could sort of take us through what thought processes they're going through.
Well, actually, I think we go back a little bit to the title because that's going to help us. You cannot hijack Islam. Islam is the religion of 1/4 of the population on the planet. There's one holy book, that is the Quran, for Muslims in the same original language. That is a life language. As it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago by Archangel Gabriel. The most quoted man in history is Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the most biographed man in history is the Prophet. So Islam itself, if you want to know anything about Islam, it cannot be more accessible at any time of history than it is right now. So for someone to deviate, for someone to commit a crime, and he has a Muslim name that he carries, and whatever that he claims as a criminal has absolutely no bearing on Islam itself because the reference is right there. The real hijacking that happened is hijacking the image of Islam in the West. And that happened by radicals in the West who try to take the crimes of the few, the crimes of the people that God only knows who finance him and who makes their horrible crimes that easy, like the 19 of the horrible crimes of September 11th, and make it a crime that is stamped on the forehead of every Muslim in the West and the 1.6 billion people out there. Taking extremes of the hit and cry old tactic or the swift boating of people where, as you just heard, Islam being the law is to be judged by the behavior of criminals or whatever radicals they call, not that the criminals themselves would be judged by Islamic law. For example, the biggest punishment and the highest punishment in Islamic law, Sharia law, that they scare people with is for terrorists. These people that committed the crimes of September 11th, had they been caught by Islam and prosecuted in an Islamic court of law, they would have been executed in public in a way to make an example of them.
Right, but
the crime is not the crime of Islam. The crime is the crime of criminals.
Okay, but again, if you could just somebody that considers themselves a Muslim that carries out such acts of violence, why do we see them take out those acts of violence? Why do we see acts of terrorism being carried out only under the name of Islam? Why are they taking verses themselves and justifying their actions like that?
I'll ask you the same question. Joe Stack, a patriotic American born and raised in America who belongs to the Tea Party, just hated the IRS for whatever reason, whatever ideology, took a plane and smashed it, killing himself in a suicide mission into the IRS building in Texas. No one considered what kind of ideology that he belongs to, if he's a Christian, what kind of faction of Christianity, and who has an effect upon them. And some people would not even call it a terrorist act. Someone in Pennsylvania the other day, a couple of months ago, took a machine gun, went into a gym, and killed 13 people for no crime that they have committed.
Okay, because we have to just keep it. So what you're saying is we see these acts of violence or terrorism being carried out, but they have nothing whatsoever to do with Islam. Yet they're Muslims that we see.
In Islam. Okay. And the big mistake that we make is that we make the criminal the ideologue. The criminal is a criminal. If you go to any jail, everyone is innocent.
Okay.
So you want to believe the criminals? Are they credible? If you want to judge them, let's look at Islamic law and see the punishment of indiscriminate killing of innocent people. There's no higher punishment in Islam.
Okay, we will turn it over back to Robert and Daniel in a few minutes, but let's turn it over to Abdullah to give him an opportunity to speak. If it's true that Islam has been hijacked, like many people claim, if that's true, how come 1.5 million or billion Muslims couldn't protect Islam from such a minority of radicals that have seemed to have hijacked the religion itself? Why couldn't they have saved the religion from this small minority?
So, Summer, just to clarify your question, you're saying that why couldn't the majority of